Danger! IntelliRupter PulseCloser fault interrupters operate at high voltage. Failure to observe the precautions below will result in serious personal injury or death. Some of these precautions may differ from your company's operating procedures and rules. Where a discrepancy exists, follow your company's operating procedures and rules. This video is intended to be used in conjunction with the written instructions that came with your product, S&C Instruction Sheet 766-530. These instructions are intended for firmware version 7.4 and later. This video series covers protection and communication setup of an IntelliRupter PulseCloser fault interrupter by using IntelliLink Setup software. Before beginning, read and understand the overview section of the written instructions. You will need to be familiar with the unique features and functions of an IntelliRupter PulseCloser fault interrupter before continuing. In this video, we'll configure the device for the PulseFinding fault location technique. The PulseFinding fault location technique allows multiple IntelliRupter PulseCloser fault interrupters to operate in series using the same TCC curve. The PulseFinding technique provides better feeder segmentation for a higher degree of reliability than can be achieved by conventional time-current coordination alone. In this example, we'll have 3 IntelliRupter fault interrupters that will be coordinated with the same protection curve. When a fault is downstream from device number 3, all 3 devices will respond to the fault current. All 3 devices will open. Because the circuit breaker did not open, the line segment between the circuit breaker and first device will remain energized. The presence of voltage will allow device number 1 to begin its test sequence and use a pulse to test for a fault. Because there is no fault between devices 1 and 2, device 1 will be able to close. When device number 1 closes, that brings voltage to device number 2, which will now use a pulse to test for a fault. Again, because there is no fault between devices 2 and 3, device 2 will close. Finally, device 3 will see a return of voltage and begin its PulseFinding technique sequence. Device 3 will see fault levels of current and continue through the configured test sequence. If the fault is persistent, device 3 will lock out. That is the basic operation of the PulseFinding fault location technique. To configure the PulseFinding technique, first navigate to Setup, Protection, and select the general profile to which the PulseFinding technique should be active. In this example, we will configure the General Profile 1, Direction 1, Current, by enabling the phase and ground over current elements with the IEEE Very Inverse curve. This curve is found in the curve library, which is installed with the IntelliRupter PulseCloser fault interrupter software. Now, navigate to Direction 2 Current. Using the Copy From button, use Direction 1 settings as a starting point and make the necessary changes. Use the Validate and Apply buttons to save the configuration. The PulseFinding Technique checkbox can be found in each Direction tab under the Initial Trip Additional Features section. In this example, we will apply the PulseFinding technique for Direction 1 and uncheck it for Direction 2. This is the basic configuration used to enable the PulseFinding technique. There is an additional feature that works with the PulseFinding technique called TCC shifting. This is recommended for feeders with high vegetation that see a high number of reinitiating faults. To turn on TCC shifting, use the TCC shifting checkbox. Then select a TCC hold time that is longer than the time for your reinitiating faults to develop. Next, set the test delay time so it is a minimum of 100 milliseconds longer than the test TCC hold time. Now, check Trip on Test Sequence TCC Low Cutoff. Now, configure the overcurrent elements for Test 1. In this example, the phase element is checked, the minimum trip is set to 400, and the low cutoff is set to Not Applicable, or NA. When the TCC hold time is in effect with these settings and the current reaches 400 amps or above, the IntelliRupter fault interrupter will perform an instantaneous trip. This concludes the configuration for the PulseFinding fault location technique. This configuration can now be saved and used for all three devices in the example circuit shown at the beginning of this video. For more information on loading and saving settings, see S&C Instruction Sheet 766-540. If you have any questions, visit our website at snc.com.